Could wrestling be the savior of Aikido? 4 years ago, I learned that Aikido doesn't work well by stepping into a ring with an MMA fighter as a lifelong Aikido student and instructor. This experience led me on a journey to train different martial arts and to ask myself, how would effective Aikido look like? I tried Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, kickboxing, judo, but only after I tried out wrestling did I realize that it may hold the answers that Aikido really needs. This realization happened during my trip to Sweden, where I met a professional MMA fighter with a karate background, Oliver Enkamp, and trained with him for a week. During this week, I joined Oliver in a wrestling class together with other professional fighters, where to my surprise, I discovered a lot of similarities between Aikido and wrestling. As soon as Oliver and I came back to his academy, I asked him some questions to figure out if wrestling is indeed the missing link to making Aikido work. His answers blew my mind. First of all, Oliver explained to me that the two most popular types of wrestling are Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling, with the main difference being that freestyle wrestling allows the use of legs as both defensive and offensive weapons, while Greco-Roman style forbids any hold below the waist. Since Aikido does not attack the legs, we decided to mainly look at Greco-Roman wrestling. During the wrestling class that we did with Oliver, I noticed that a lot of wrestling techniques were focused on being very close to your training partner, while in Aikido, most techniques had a lot of distance between the attacker and Aikidoka.
A lot of it was here, that's an Ikkyo, that's a Koregeshi, that's a Nikkyo, there's a Sankyo, you know, it's all I'm here, you're
it's
there.
Hard to control me from over there.
Oliver was right. While there was the logic of using the connection to your tanden, aka center of gravity, through unbendable arms, in reality, during most Aikido techniques the attacker has plenty of space to resist, turn out, or escape. Yet as Oliver showed me, by getting really close to the attacker, it is much easier to control them.
If you're standing far away, you're relying on the arms to do the throws and the takedowns. Small amount of weight and mass used to throw your entire body. I want to use as much of my mass as possible. I use the arms to connect us, boom, and then I use the legs and the rest of the body to take you down. Holding a weight out here is way harder than holding a weight in here. Instead of staying out here, the closer I am, the more connection I have, the more control I'm gonna have of the situation. If I want to throw you with this, I'm not gonna pull the arm, I'm gonna lock the arm and twist the body. So I lock it to my body and use as much body mass as possible to throw your hips in.
The move that Oliver showed reminded me of an Aikido technique called Ikkyo, or first principle. But done by being close to the attacker, it became much more effective. I then wondered if adding wrestling principles would make other Aikido techniques more effective as well. So we decided to take a look at an Aikido technique known as the Riminage, entering throw.
Yeah. I'm standing here where between our hips, there's a lot of distance. Like I'm trying to move you with my core, essentially with my arms. That's gonna be really heavy. But if I enter with the hips, and I move you or in any way, it just makes such a big difference.
This also reminded me of something that Rickson Gracie, a legendary martial artist, spoke about. Rickson would often refer to connection, which as Matt Thornton, a student of Rickson Gracie, explained to me, was the element of how little space or slack a martial artist left between themselves and the other person. If there was a lot of space, gaps, or slack left between, say, a rear naked choke, the choke would either not work at all, or the practitioner would have to use a lot of physical force to finish the choke. Yet if there was no space or slack left, in other words, there was a lot of connection, the choke would be done almost effortlessly. I started to consider that maybe the same applied to Aikido throws and techniques. To find out if I was right, we took a look at an Aikido technique known as Shihonage, or a 4 directions throw.
So if I make it like really poor, the essence is, you know, I go here. I'm adding connection in this regard.
Look,
now it's very different.
Whoa. Now you pull this over your head.
Right.
Oh, I'm already gonna fall.
The same principle of connection also worked with the previously explored Riminage.
If I'm stepping in here, and if you resist, this is where I would try to like either destabilize you, but it doesn't work. But if I would add like hips, suddenly it just like becomes effortless. But no one taught me that.
This discovery was already mind-blowing, but there were even more things that Oliver was about to tell me that kept blowing my mind further. The next thing Oliver explained to me, which is very important to wrestling, was called chaining techniques, something I found to be another missing link in Aikido.
If I run towards your legs to take you down, and you start resisting this way, I will grab one leg and pull, and if you start to resist this, I will go in and lift.
Meanwhile, in Aikido, only a single technique was taught at a time. If the attacker resisted that technique, there was no pre-designed alternative technique to move on to. Instead, the Aikidoka either expected the technique to work, or they would try to move through the resistance, something that against a truly resisting opponent just doesn't work. Another important missing link to Aikido that Oliver showed me in wrestling was the action-reaction principle.
I go in and start pushing you backward and make you push back. I can use your force.
What Oliver showed me reminded me of an Aikido technique.
One of the Aikido techniques is I enter and I bring you here to throw.
I would just like
but that's the thing.
Which didn't prove to be very effective. But when Oliver added the action-reaction principle to it,
and I start pushing you and you push me back.
Right. Pushing, right.
the results were much better. Next up was another game changer. A very important concept that Aikido promotes is defeating an attacker without using violence. Yet Oliver rightfully pointed out that throwing the attacker, a result that most Aikido techniques lead to, doesn't lead to a non-violent outcome. Meanwhile, wrestling does have solutions to defeating an opponent without the use of violence.
For example, the arm drag we did.
Right.
I can take it down like this.
Right.
This is a pretty easy way to take you down without you hurting yourself, right? And here I have great control. If I throw this in, boom. Now I control you without using any violence.
Another solution that wrestling offered was the approach of closing the distance and dealing with strikes. Most Aikido techniques rely on the attacker infamously stepping in with a punch as the Aikidoka enters to perform the technique. But as Oliver pointed out, that wasn't an effective approach.
If you're doing an Aikido technique, most often would you agree that I take a step in and punch? So I covered the distance for you. You can just go to the side and you're in the exchange. If I'm fighting you, I'm not gonna step in, I'm gonna reach. You haven't covered that distance. You need to take a step in to cover that distance. But you know my punches are coming. That's what makes it much harder for you to get into those grips and those grappling exchanges. It would be more about covering up and entering with the footwork, going through your punches either by shelling up, going through into a clinch, or by moving my head and finding angles to come in without getting hit.
These skills of covering the distance to get close enough for a takedown are usually not taught in Aikido. Aikido is also infamously known for relying on being grabbed by the attacker. But while wrestling relies on grabs as well, it offers a more functional approach to it.
So either I can grab you, and this would be a way for me to enter. You see, I can take your back from here, or I can bait, I can give you my wrist, and if you grab my wrist, I can use the same principle.
That showed me yet again that wrestling may very well be the missing link to making Aikido effective, which makes me even more interested to practice more wrestling. If you're interested to see how I tried to use my functional Aikido against a Judo brown belt, click right here. If you want to see the full exchange between me and Oliver on wrestling being the missing link to Aikido, click here. Thanks for watching, and as always, I wish to own your journey.